Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cichetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a lead fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Boy, oh boy, this is a fantastic opportunity where I get to interview and talk to my friend, an amazing guy and lead fellow and just an incredible person making an impact, right, in the green industry, Charlie Cichetti. So my name's Danny Bauer, right, in case you don't know me. And I help actually behind the scenes with the podcast, but I'll stop there with my introduction. Charlie, welcome to your own show.
Danny, I appreciate you being willing to come on and get on the microphone. I know you do some amazing work in school systems across really not just the United States, the world. You and I have known each other for a long time. You've encouraged me to start a podcast. You and your team have been producing it behind the scenes. And, we just encourage each other, right, with not just business, but life best practices. So I know you're a great interviewer. You'll probably ask me some tough questions, but, we're kind of celebrating right here on this podcast here, early 2023, January, a couple things. This is 5 years we've done this podcast, over 250 episodes, amazing guests from all over the world. I still get lots of feedback all the time. Someone on LinkedIn, gosh, that was an amazing interview. And just, really sometimes great. It's someone that's been in this industry a long time and they need that spark. Oh man, I'm so glad I heard that from so-and-so. Or maybe it is a new to this industry, young professional, or just someone that's making a career change. So it's still very encouraging. And I think we timed this one because doing a little reflecting myself, Danny. I'm later this week going to be turning 40, big 4-0.
All right. Congratulations. So how does that feel, by the way?
Everyone's been asking me, and I have a good friend. He said, no, when you turn 50, your body changes. I'm like, okay, that's good to know. But, I look back on my 20s, my 30s, and now here heading into my 40s. But, I think, I try to stay humble and just kind of looking back on what's been done so far, but there's still some unfinished business on a lot of fronts. But I feel really good. I've really been focused even on my health. I know we've been talking about that a lot together and just kind of where, our companies are at and my family's at. And so I feel like I'm in a pretty good place, still a little work to do. Always life going to throw you some curveballs, but I'm happy. And heading into 40, going to have a little fun coming up.
Sweet. I think it was the great philosopher Jay-Z who said 40 is the new 30. So
all right.
I hope that's how you hope that's how you feel. I do have questions about the podcast. You mentioned 5 years, 250 episodes, and that's pretty amazing. Before I ask my sort of bigger question around the podcast, are there anybody, on the podcast team you just want to give some shout outs to, to thank, express some gratitude? Because 5 years, that's no joke. And let me express gratitude to you first. Thank you for the opportunity, right, to serve you in the team. And it's been fun to see you do this, right? To put your voice, your ideas, your generosity, leadership into the industry. And that's been super cool. So, but any shout outs you want to give before we move on?
Yeah, well, Danny, you and the entire podcast team, thanks for everyone that's been supporting. That makes us sound amazing here online and keeps us to a great schedule. And Carla, who's just really helps find, schedule our guests and just really coordinate. And she's just done an amazing job to make sure this podcast is a success.
Yeah. So I don't want to put you on the hot seat and say, who was your favorite guest? I'm not going to do that.
Yeah,
but I do want to... Yeah, that would be really hard to answer. But 5 years, 250 episodes later, when you reflect on creating all those episodes and being present, digging in deeply into those conversations, what are some of the highlights and takeaways talking to these experts in the field?
Man, it's just some amazing stories, right? I think that's how we've tailored the podcast here. The Green Building Matters podcast is just get someone to really tell not just their story, their journey, make it relatable to someone listening. And everyone's done a great job with that. We don't get real technical. How do you do that lead item, this or that? No. Tell us your story, your journey. Where were your struggles at? How'd you get past them? And so we've got some amazing storytellers here, Danny, in this green building movement. And honestly, that's one of the secrets to success is we have to be able to make sure the work we do in green buildings is relatable to those that haven't done it yet, right? So I think number one, we've got some great storytellers, for the most part, pretty humble group, right? When I ask them questions, for example, just, hey, what are you best at? Like, what's your gift? They're like, whoa, that's a tough one. And it forces them to do a little reflecting. My guests, love to give shout outs to mentors. And one thing that's interesting is not everybody had, mentors. Some really, wherever they grew up or early in their career, just they had to go figure it out and pave their own way. And others, maybe they had someone to look up to or someone did open a door for them. And so there's kind of a mix there. That's kind of surprising. The bucket list questions are always fun, and I got to get all the good bucket list ideas out of everybody. And just everyone is very optimistic that we are doing good work. We are making some progress, but there's still a lot of work to do. And it's a good way to, when I ask the question, what's next? If you had a crystal ball, that's where I challenge all of our listeners to just write down those notes. Because if it's coming from the group that we've vetted to be on the podcast, you can pay attention to it. If they're focused on it, we need to focus on it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty cool. So thanks for sharing that. We've already mentioned turning 40 and 5 years with the podcast, 250 episodes, and we're reflecting on your career, which is really pretty cool. So let's talk about your GBH companies, and you have multiple businesses, and that's impressive. I don't know how you lead them all, but that's a pretty cool skill set that you have. But tell us just a bit about what all do you have going on these days?
Yeah, no, thanks for that opportunity. Some listeners might know my story and some might not. This might be the first time you're hearing who's this guy, Charlie Cichetti, like spaghetti here, this green building guy. And but I would say, I love business. I love entrepreneurship. And luckily I've been able to do that, in the sustainability movement. So while my background is Georgia Tech and construction, then I got into real estate. That large real estate company I worked for, they were an early adopter of LEED in the early to mid 2000s. Then the 2008 recession happened. And next thing you know, that forced me and another buddy of mine to start a business. And we got into in-person LEED training around the U.S. And then we got into consulting when I came over full time, and then technical engineering work like energy modeling, commissioning, these things on new construction LEED. Later, after that, we got into existing buildings and how do you go in and retrofit and go into one of my favorite places while I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, come up to New York City and just how do we green up these skyscrapers and portfolios of real estate at a time, and now even ESG and healthy buildings. So kind of that evolution is, early in my career, construction, real estate. Luckily, cut my teeth early on LEED, fantastic program tool we've had for over 20 years, and really grew SIG, our consulting and engineering firm that also does the in-person training. We'd always partner with GBES.com, Green Building Education Services. That's how a lot of our listeners, right, probably know us, Danny, around the world. We've helped 150,000 people pass their LEED or WELL exams and keep up their continuing ed. I know you've done work with our GBES team, and it's quite the brand. When we go to conferences and even overseas, people come up and hug my neck and they're like, I love your content and your webinars and your podcast, and you helped my career. Nice. You helped me pass this exam. And that's pretty rewarding, to be honest, for someone I don't know to come up and say those nice things about not just me, but our entire education team. So we have the consulting and engineering, in-person training at SIG. And really that's kind of shifted over to GBES.com and all things e-learning in this green and healthy building set of movements. But I guess crazy serial entrepreneur in the last couple of years, even right before the pandemic, I was like, I want to get into technology. I don't want to run off and start a restaurant or something. I want to get into technology. And I want to build the tools that we need for this green building movement. And so we've stood up a couple of technology teams in the last almost 3 years now, in the form of Aetos Imaging, our 3D technology company that's now venture backed. and our Blue Ocean Sustainability team, which is our lab to market technology hub, where we also are focused on embodied carbon, right? It's not just about saving energy, operating buildings really efficiently. That's operating carbon, but it's about our embodied carbon, our materials we pick, low carbon concrete, timber frame structures, yes, but so much more. And really, how do we change the way buildings are going to be designed and built in the future? So we've got some new technology we're going to be announcing in 2023. Now, Danny, I can't lead all those businesses. While they are small giants in each of their disciplines in this sustainability movement, I'm very thankful for the leadership team we've got in place. And we actually have a president or a CEO over each of our business units. And I'm fortunate to be able to jump in and out and see where I can help. I do love leadership and, setting the vision and making sure we can hire and retain the best talent and just make sure we have the resources to pull this off and make a difference. So we do have 4 different brands, 4 different business units. We really come together as what we kind of call GBH or Green Building Holdings. And I think we're doing some great work.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. So, okay, fine. Maybe you're not like on the ground leading them all the time. But surely you have some pro tips. Like you said, you got those four entities. And maybe there's a listener who dreams of growing something like you have, right? Or a colleague in the space and they just, they respect and appreciate what you've done, even at the macro, right? Working with these companies, the 4 that you have, you can apply that to the micro of one company and the different divisions within it and that kind of thing. So any pro tips on how you develop those presidents or, how you develop those teams so you can be the vision guy and, like you said, jump in and out? Because that's actually, last thing I'll say, a hallmark of a leader is like knowing your lane, knowing how to delegate and this kind of thing. But what pro tips do you have?
Well, great question. First, number one is to understand the difference between management and leadership. And, I think you've got to really study that. And I think then you really, it took me a while to get a little better at, say, delegation. But you really want to have, Patrick Lencioni says, look, have team members that are humble, hungry, and smart. And I think that's something I've really tried to live by. And then, in our movement, which, has people of all ages, but in general, right, a lot of enthusiasm coming out of the young professional side of our movement is just really try to, coach and get consultants to develop your leadership team within where appropriate. And then I'm proud that now we're at the size where we too can actually go out and hire some more senior leaders, maybe from different parts of our industry. So now we've got both. We're developing internally. We've got a great kind of farm system, if you will, with our paid internship program and those that are just passionate to get into this movement. And hopefully we can hire on, they can hire on full time when they're done with their internship and then move up within our companies. And then, again, we're kind of at the size now and all across the U.S. and even some international projects that, if needed, we can hire in some more top talent that's bringing in a lot of new experience and some other best practices. So, yeah, I'd say just don't study the difference between management and leadership. Definitely try to invest internally and take care of your team, make sure there's autonomy, and just they'll be proactive to make the business a lot better in many, many ways.
Nice. I think you've given us a little bit of context of where we are, and we look back a bit, and feel free to add to that. But I'm really curious too of where are we going in the green building industry, and what are some of the trends that you're identifying?
Sure, and just a little glance back, right? Rating systems like LEED, like WELL and FitWell, and these programs that give us a common framework to follow. And hey, if we do it right, we can get awards for it. And that helps us, right? There's the business case for it too. And we get these plaques and these certifications. And yes, those need to raise the bar every, say, 5 years. So I think that's where we've been. Then a pandemic hits, right? And it put a lot of attention to maybe better air quality in buildings and filtration. And are we doing the right cleaning and green cleaning? Is this a safe and healthy building or not? You're asking me to come back post-pandemic? I'm kind of used to the convenience of working from home. And so I think what happened is while programs like LEED have been around for 20 years, LEED's going to go through some updates in the next 18 months. There's a lot that LEED will include in the future. And it's still the most followed green building program. And then you have well and fit well that are really proactive. There's so many more things we can do with a healthy building, like living walls and stand-up desk, active furnishings, all kinds of circadian lighting. And the program that I studied 7-8 years ago when I first passed my well AP, it's still happening. But I think what happened is the pandemic forced lots of real estate, lots of office spaces, especially, or really all buildings, to do a little better with air quality and sanitation first. And so kind of where we're at and turning the page, I think, Danny, is, okay, the pandemic is in the rear view. Now, there's still stuff going around, but it's in the rear view. How do we get back to proactive, healthy buildings, green buildings? Yes, that was a pretty monumental thing that happened. And the office spaces especially are different going forward. So I think that's sort of kind of where we're at. I think what's coming next is still that shift from operating carbon, where we've got to have energy efficient buildings. Programs like LEED force us to do that. Local laws, like in New York and other cities and states, you really have to make sure you're putting up energy efficient buildings and homes. Still a lot of work to do there, but the shift is already on for embodied carbon, the materials, the supply chain. Heck, even during construction, are we tracking the energy, water, and waste during construction? Are we getting accurate data on all of this? Because soon you're going to have to report that out. My team, we really debate in this way. We think, to get a building permit in the near future to build a new building, you're going to have a total carbon plan. You're going to have to plan out where you're sourcing all your materials, what kind of lighting you will have, insulation systems, and how's the whole carbon going to be accounted for in the near future. So we're seeing a lot of those trends. We built some tools around it to help track that. And then where does healthy building still fit in, right? Is it just assumed you have to do it? I mean, heck, I was in New York City recently with some clients, and they're explaining to me, you almost have to put on a hospitality hat if you're a company or an office building to get people to say, okay, I'll come in a couple days a week, but I need this to be like the Ritz-Carlton here at my office. You know what I'm saying? I'm being facetious, but you understand is things have changed and there's a shift. Is this a green space? Is it safe? Is it healthy? Is it really proactive wellness? Let's get back to that. That's my challenge to our listeners today. And then it's, what's my experience like? Because I now have a choice. And I think a lot of employees realize that more than ever. So the shift to embodied carbon, data, artificial intelligence, just innovation left and right. A lot of exciting things coming. And we all need to embrace it. As a business person, you're a business person, right, Danny? I think some business models will change. If you were just strictly a certain fee-based business, that's probably going to change. And so you need to be whiteboarding that out now. Like, hey, how can we go ahead and get ahead of that before it hurts us?
So what are you doing about some of these trends? You mentioned some of the tools that you're building, especially around carbon, right? And what's happening during construction. But I'm just curious, what are you doing about some of these trends?
I'm attending different conferences than I maybe have in the past. And so I think that's a place to go and try to get around the business leaders that are starting to talk about, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, how will their business be different? So while it has a sustainability or a technology kind of theme at this summit of 100 people or so, how are they thinking? How can I maybe support them and see what they're struggling with? So a little bit more of that. I think with our education at GBES.com, it's part of our job, we feel, our education team does, to make sure we're teaching about a lot of these changes we do think are coming, whether that's a 101 level class. Hey, what is it? A 201 level class? Well, why does it affect me? Why should I care? A 301 level class, how do I do it? Or a 401 level class, Danny, how do I master it? So we're rolling out even more of the 301, 401. How do you do it? How do you master it? We see a big need for that. One aha is a lot of professionals pass a LEED exam, but unfortunately don't get to work on an actual LEED project. And so we want to make sure, hey, let's get you that project experience so you are ready to go work on your own LEED project. So those are some things that we're doing.
And if people want to enroll, right, in some of those programs, especially to get to that mastery level, where would you point them?
Yeah, GBES.com. Make sure that you go ahead and maybe even sign up to the newsletter there. You can ping me on LinkedIn. I'll make sure you get connected. Where are we really ultimately going to go? Well, we want energy efficient buildings. We want eco-friendly buildings. We want LEED Platinum buildings. What's next? Well, net zero. There's a lot of mandates. We've got to get to net zero with our homes and buildings. But then we really want to go to regenerative design. And so a class that we partner with my good friend Emmanuel in Spain, outside of Barcelona, Spain, and his team is regenerative design. Ultimately, our buildings and homes are giving back, right? They're giving more than they're taking. They're net positive energy, net positive water, net positive waste. Some buildings are already doing that. So we're already kind of teaching that. Now that's a framework shift. Not everybody's ready for that. And so we try to make sure we do both. We show you how to do programs like LEED. How could you get a LEED Platinum project? Fit well. What do you need to know for mandates and getting to net zero? But if you're ready, and any of our listeners, if you're ready, take a look. We're going to do this a couple times this year at our regenerative design masterclass. And that is something you need to check out because that's what we're ultimately going to need to get to.
Any other tips you have in terms of navigating the industry in 2023?
Yeah, I think if you're in or getting into the green building movement, the sustainability movement, while it might not be recession proof, I think it's recession resistant. Okay. We're seeing a lot of great projects come through, getting signed up, all kinds of great certification work. If that were ever to slow, you've got local mandates, so many energy efficiency things. Studying for electrification of buildings. Can we install renewables here? There's a lot of different ways that you're going to be able to keep up over the next few years. My dad's asked me before, hey, how do politics affect, your industry and things like that? And I just try to explain here in the U.S., there's so many mandates, state and city, even your small town maybe, that are telling you to do some of these things for every building you build or renovate over a certain square footage. And so depending on where our federal government is, depending on who's in office, that might ebb and flow every 4 to 8 years. Luckily, right now, we're seeing a lot of mandates proactive towards carbon reduction, energy efficiency, and green and healthy buildings. But since that ebbs and flows, as we know, every 4 to 8 years, there's so many just mandates, state and city, and don't forget Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies that say, hey, no matter what they're doing, this is what we're going to mandate. If you want to do business with us, even companies like Walmart, for example, a lot of people don't know this. They have forced all the way up their supply chain sustainability just to do business with them, right? Because they have that say. So my advice is study all that. Don't wait for these projects to come to you. Kind of build up some different skill sets, whether you're helping with just some mandates in your state or city with energy efficiency or maybe LEED, all the way to when we have momentum around green buildings and certification work. How can you go be a part of those projects? So don't wait. A lot of our listeners, hear our podcast guest, Danny, say volunteer with committees, get tapped into your local US GBC chapters, of course, all of that. But go out and ask questions, even of some business leaders that maybe you can have access to is what trends are they seeing? But don't forget, there's going to be a lot of sustainability and energy efficiency requirements that are baked in. And so just don't wait on that next project to come over your desk, just in case there are some slowdowns. It's out there, but it might come in a different form. It might be some smaller scopes here and there, and then it gets back to where it's full certifications left and right.
I think we should highlight the LEED group that we have, right? We do a monthly call for LEED fellows, and there's a lot of participation, a lot of engagement. We see the same faces, so we know they're getting tons of value there. But there's some people that haven't experienced it yet. So if the listener is in that elite group of being a LEED fellow or aspiring to become a LEED fellow, can you just give a high-level overview of what we do with people each month?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 3 tiers with the LEED credentials, right? LEED Green Associate. It's a 100-question multiple choice exam, and you've got to start there. And then there's some specialty credentials, tier 2. I've passed all of them, LEED AP, BD plus C, O plus M, et cetera. But then there's peer nominated, can't test into it, LEED fellow. So out of 200,000 people in the world, right, Danny, that have passed the elite exam over the last about 20 years, only about 380 have been named lead fellow. And so it is a really cool exclusive group. And you're right. We meet once a month, and it's just a powerhouse group that is all over the world and just comes together and say, hey, how can we help? How can we do more? And while there might be some competitors sometimes in the room, it's like, no, right? A rising tide lifts all boats. So big shout out to the lead fellow group, to the U.S. Green Building Council for having such an honor, which is, kind of tough to get into. At the time we're launching this podcast, the applications for 2023 are open. We can put a link in the podcast show notes for that. If you or someone you know has really had about 10 years worth of kind of lead efforts in different forms, community involvement, volunteering, maybe authoring some education, working on projects. There's so many different ways to show that you've been an advocate for LEED and green buildings. Check it out. See what it takes to maybe one day join the LEED Fellow group. That'd be great.
I know usually on your show towards the end, you love to point people towards resources. It could be a book, documentary, maybe a TED Talk or some kind of video. But yeah, what's something that you've enjoyed recently that's given you a lot of encouragement or a mindset shift that you would share with our listener today?
So one book that I'm getting through, this was recommended, is called Unreasonable Hospitality. Okay. The remarkable power of giving people more than they expect. Unreasonable hospitality.
Unreasonable hospitality. And that maybe that will help too. You said a lot of buildings and organizations have to put on that white glove service, right? Yeah. And I see you holding up my book, Master. So, okay, fine. I'll put a plug in there. Listen, if you have a kid in school, if there is a school in your community, which there is everywhere, and you care about leveling up that leadership of the building administrator, would you check out my book? It is a bestseller. It's called Mastermind: Unlocking Talent Within Every School Leader. Thanks for the shout out, Charlie. So, and then the unreasonable hospitality, I'm sure that would help with that white glove service. I'm just assuming, I haven't read it, but in creating that welcoming, inclusive space, like the Ritz-Carlton, like you said, so that people want to be there and come back into work. All right. So, but yeah, back to the bucket list. I don't know if you have an answer for that question. Is there one or two that you're working on in 2023?
Yeah. So I'm actually now a big fan of a bucket list. I know not everybody is. That's okay. I had a business mentor that ran our Vistage group here in Atlanta for many, many years. A guy named Tim Fulton. And this was, I don't know, probably 8 years ago. And Tim said, Charlie, what's on your bucket list? I said, Tim, I think I'm a little young for a bucket list. The next day, I realized that was ignorant. And so I sent Tim an email with 10 items on my newly drafted bucket list. Fast forward to today, I have about 100 items. They're categorized by travel and adventure, maybe sporting related, or maybe something to do with my family. And I've got these different categories. And I try to do about maybe 5 a year. Okay. So what's coming up? I was gifted courtside tickets to the Atlanta Hawks. And I'll be going this weekend. The friend that gifted that to me, it's amazing. Did not know that was on my bucket list. So I'm going to check that one off very soon. Go Hawks. And, when it comes to travel, for some of the work I do, whether it's teaching, maybe speaking from stage, maybe some project work, maybe bringing some of our technology our teams have built. I've been traveling. I hadn't really stamped the passport, Danny, until almost, 6-7 years ago. And now I can say I've actually been to a lot of great countries. So fortunately, sometimes work will take me to some really cool new places. Sometimes I'll bring my wife, Latrice, with me. And our boys are younger now, 14, 11, and 9. Sometimes, of course, we'll take some cool trips together. But, I've got different experiences. Sure, I'd love to, get to different parts of the world. Our middle son would love to go to Japan in a couple of years. And so, I'll say, okay, on the bucket list, I won't just say go to Japan. I'll say, okay, find the best place to have sushi in this town in Japan. And so I try to add a layer of an experience to that destination. So definitely got pretty sizable bucket list, different themes, but I'm going to check a couple off here in the next few months.
Brilliant. Yeah, and that specificity and that idea around experience too, I think really makes it a lot more attractive, right, and challenging, so that you want to do it. Well, Charlie, it's been my pleasure to talk to you on this show as we celebrate, your birthday and 5 years of the podcast, 250 something episodes. We covered a lot of ground. What's the one thing you want a listener to remember?
This was a lot of fun today. Thank you for doing this, Danny. The one thing kind of this point, as we start a new year, 2023, and where we're at with green buildings and healthy buildings is, some of our podcast guests, some argue to be a generalist, some argue to be more of a specialist. So that's an interesting debate that sometimes comes up. But I would just say, look, even if you're just now jumping into this green building movement, like, there is plenty of room for you. Really excited for you to get into this movement. It's been very rewarding for me so far and in my career here. So I just want you to hear encouragement, because I think just human nature, Danny, we all need more encouragement, right? I think sometimes human nature goes to what's broken or what's wrong. And so let's just keep it, hey, what's working? And let's just make sure we're giving ourselves a little more encouragement about some of the progress we're making. Here's what's working. I would challenge architects and engineers and contractors to share data, to share best practices, right? It's not going to put you out of business. It's going to help you. It's going to help industries. And one thing is, if you've got lots of sustainability projects over the years in your firms, you have a lot of data. You've been forced to do energy models and lead documentation, or well and fit well documentation, and local ordinances and AIA 2030. So you actually have a lot of data. Let's be a little more sharing of that. And that's going to help a lot of others that maybe are either just getting into it, or maybe there's a peer that needs to compare notes, and you can find a way to partner. So encourage, partner, and I'm just glad you're part of this movement. Thanks, everyone, for listening to the Green Building Matters podcast. Thanks, buddy.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At GBES.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to GBES.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.